morning. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Today is Tuesday, November 5th, 2013. It's 6:30 p.m. We're at the Palm Coast Community Center for the regularly scheduled meeting of the Palm Coast City Council. Would you please rise and join me in a pledge of allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Roll call, please.
Mayor Nets.
Here.
Vice Mayor McGuire.
Here.
Councilmember DiLorenzo.
Here.
Councilmember Ferguson.
Here.
Councilmember Lewis.
Here.
Mayor, all members are present.
Thank you. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the October 15th council meeting and the October 29th council workshop. Are there any additions, corrections, or is there a motion for approval?
Move to approve. Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries without objection. Agenda item number 2, presentation of Business Beautification Award. Mr. Landon.
Mr. Butler.
Mr.
All
Butler.
yours.
Thank you. Bill Butler, City Landscape Architect. I'm pleased to be here again tonight on behalf of the Beautification and Environmental Advisory Committee, who has another award recipient to present tonight. This is a really neat one, I think. This is going to Flagler Dental, which is located in the Flagler Regional Shopping Center right next to Woody's. Woody's is in the same building. And here's some before pictures that were taken of this project. And it was really kind of a tired-looking place. And Russell Stover's Candies moved out, so we had a vacant storefront there, which is, never really that attractive. Dead trees, vines, irrigation didn't really work very well. The building was purchased by the doctors group, and they began renovations. Interior completely gutted that building. Andy Dance, the local landscape architect, provided the landscape architectural services for them, and Naturescapes, another local landscape contractor, did all the landscape work. They changed the facade of the building, painted it, put some accent colors, restriped the parking lot, did some new curbing, redid the irrigation. A lot of it's Florida-friendly landscaping, and it met all our criteria. But it's really good because it's helped to reinvigorate that part of Palm Coast. It's an area that, these buildings and shopping center were all permitted before we became a city, which didn't conform to our current landscape standards, and it's really refreshing to see somebody do that on their own, not because they're forced to, because they want to. So this building is looking nicer now. The regional shopping center has been taking it upon themselves to plant more trees in their parking lot, and the Kangaroo gas station, just a couple of lots to the west, has done a renovation as well. So that whole area just looks really good, and I'm really, really pleased about this. I want to bring up at this time Glenn Partolo. He's our co-chair, or of our Beautification Environment Advisory Committee. Glenn, you want to come up? And is our recipient here tonight, Dr. Smith? Yeah, come on up. I'll let Glenn say a few words on behalf of the committee.
Well, Mr. Butler certainly covered just about everything that I would like to say. It's certainly a pleasure since I live in the area, is to drive down Route 100 and see this former tired area looking so much better, and the other businesses following suit. And our committee certainly likes to go out of their way to recognize efforts as wonderful as this project is. So I'd like to present this to Dr. Smith. I don't know your first name. Ryan. On behalf of the committee, present you with this award, and thank you for being so thoughtful for our city.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right.
We have a sign also that you can display it for your business for a month.
Okay. I appreciate it. Just want to say thank you to the City of Palm Coast for recognizing the planning and hard work that went into this. Thank you.
Congratulations, Doctor. It really looks great.
The committee certainly would like to thank Bill Butler for spearheading our group as well.
Okay, agenda item number 3, an ordinance amending the European Village Development Agreement. Mr. Reichman.
Mr. Mayor, Council, this is an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Palm Coast, Florida, amending the European Village Plan Unit Development Agreement, which was Ordinance 2002-04. It's providing for the changing of the use for the Welcome Center or Administrative Office Building described in that ordinance, changing the title from PUD Agreement to MPD Agreement, providing for severability for conflicts and for an effective date. Mr. Mayor, Council, this is the second hearing and the public hearing, and this is a quasi-judicial matter. So if there have been any ex parte communications that any of you have received since the first hearing of this, those need to be disclosed for the parties at this time.
Are there any ex parte communications?
I've had communications with a citizen that Mr. Reichman's well aware of. However, I don't believe that it'll affect my ability to objectively make a decision here.
Thank you. Anyone else?
None.
Mr. Landon.
Mayor, City Council, this is actually the second reading of this proposal. As usual, with something as simple as this one, we aren't going to do the full presentation from staff. This proposal is just to allow for the lobby area of European Village that has been sitting vacant for a number of years to be a standalone office area. It was in the PUD agreement, it was designated as a lobby and administrative offices, and this action would allow for those uses to continue, but also to be a standalone office. Prudential Real Estate office is planned for this space. We have had no objections other than originally some of the businesses in European Village had questions, but once those questions were answered, I'm not objecting. Staff obviously thinks this is a very good idea to get this space occupied. But with all that said, as we indicated to you at the last public hearing, there are issues at European Village that we are working on that are unrelated to this application, but are more involved in the entire European Village complex. At the public hearing, you had an individual who brought one of those issues up and has since provided us with additional information. We've had some communication. It's really a legal matter, so I've asked our city attorney to do is to address the issue of the easement versus a license agreement, and would like him to address that at this time.
Is this germane to the issue in front of us?
It's germane to the issue in front of you just because you have someone who has brought it up. It is, but I was going to add, it is not relevant to the item in front of you. You're welcome to take action on this item and then address this if you like, whatever you'd like to do, Mayor. But we do think it needs to be addressed.
I think I'd prefer to take action on the item as it stands, and then we can go on to those ancillary issues.
Okay.
Council questions? Seeing none, we'll open the meeting to the public. Anyone from the public wish to be heard on agenda item number 3? Seeing no one approach the podium, we'll close the public portion of the meeting. Go back to council. Additional questions, comments, or motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Vice Mayor McGuire?
Yes.
Councilmember DiLorenzo?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferguson?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Mayor Net?
Yes.
Mayor, this motion passes 5-0.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Landon, on these unrelated and yet topical issues.
Once again, it's, I think Mr. Reichman would like to give you a legal opinion about the easement and the license agreement, et cetera, because of some of the confusion that came up. So I'll turn it over to Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Landon. Yes, Mayor, City Council, you may remember during the last discussion, the last hearing we had on this, there were some statements were made about the relationship of the original Plan Unit Development Agreement to what exists out there right now. And specifically, there was a statement made that the developer was required in 2002 to provide a perpetual easement and failed to do so. And the city, and that allegation had been made before the PLDRB and had been raised on various occasions. And so obviously that was something that the city wanted to investigate, did, found that there was indeed in 2002 a perpetual easement. It provides under its term that it has a term that is perpetual. And I provided a copy of that document for the record to address that specific allegation. Since that time, and it was actually in the same meeting, but after the close of the quasi-judicial hearing, the same citizen raised kind of the same concerns about what happened thereafter, and provided those concerns to you in some emails, ex parte communications, which you have identified appropriately so. And so really the main purpose is I'm trying to make sure that the record is clear as to all the relationships. And in 2006, there was an amendment to the perpetual easement. And in that 2006 amendment, it still said that the term was perpetual. Didn't change that one little bit. It did make one more change in that it required the developer to start paying on an annual basis some monies to the CDD for the maintenance of the land that is subject to the perpetual easement. Apparently in 2009, there was a dispute between the developer and the CDD, and they sued each other, and the developer defaulted, meaning he didn't file a response or make an appearance in the lawsuit. And a default judgment was entered against the developer in favor of the CDD. And the court, arguably incorrectly, but nevertheless, when it's default, these things happen, entered an order terminating the easement. And at that same time, as the developer was gone, and the development, European Village, was being operated and being managed and run by the association, the condominium association out there, that association negotiated a license agreement to allow the same uses of the CDD's property as had been in the perpetual easement. And that's the history of it. The city was not involved in the 2006 easement amendment. The city was not involved in the lawsuit. As a matter of fact, no one at the city was made aware of the 2006 amendment to the easement, nor was anyone in the city made aware. I mean, when I say the city, I mean Planning Department, Development Services, City Administration, City Attorney's Office. None of us were aware of this. We've become aware of this until after the first reading. And that is why I think it was important for the city, through me, to make sure that this council is aware of how those new facts relate, or in this case, don't relate. Because that's the bottom line. These are all facts that have relation to the role of the city in making sure going forward that European Village complies with its obligations for access and for parking. But these allegations, these facts about the easement have absolutely, as a matter of the law, no legal relationship to the factors that are determine whether or not this one particular unit owner that came before you earlier tonight had the legal right to seek a different zone or different use of its property. And those factors are set forth in your land development code for rezonings. And those factors were described in detail in your staff report and with staff presentation at the first reading. First reading before the PLDRB, and to the extent that you would have needed them would have been available to you this evening. So again, we're trying to protect the record. We're trying to make sure that the council understands how this all fits together, or in this case doesn't relate, and that the decision for rezoning is not related to the issues about the perpetual easement. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer any concerns you may have.
Council, any questions for the attorney?
None here.
Thank you for that explanation. Agenda item number 4, ordinance relating to amending Chapter 29 impact fees, park system impact fees. Mr. Reichman.
Mayor, Council, this is an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Palm Coast, Florida, relating to amending Chapter 29 impact fees, Article 3 park system impact fees, amending sections 2973, 2974, 2975, 2976, 2980, 2981, 2984, and Exhibit A, park impact fee formula. This ordinance provides for applicability, codification, conflict, severability, and effective date.
Mr. Landon.
Mayor, City Council, few months ago, you directed staff to work with our rate fee consultant with PRMG, Public Resource Management Group, that has expertise on utility rates, impact fees, a variety of government-type fees. Because our park impact fees, as it is right now, is very convoluted. The formula that everybody knows that deals with it, that it is hard to follow and is got a lot of flaws in it. So we've asked our consultant to come back and basically rework it totally, throw out our current methodology and work on a brand new methodology and a new fee. He has completed that. You've had one workshop on this, you've had 3 workshops on this issue, with the final report being presented to you last week. And he's ready to now present that to you and receive public input as first reading. I'm going to turn it over to Henry, and Henry, if you'll take it from here, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Landon. Is this song? Okay. Good evening, Mayor, members of council. As Mr. Landon pointed out, we had an initial workshop to talk about my recommended approach to developing impact fees. Subsequent to that, as I understand it, and I was not in attendance, there was a workshop regarding the recreational assets that we would consider in developing the fee, and staff provided me the results of that workshop. Subsequent to that, we had another workshop to discuss the fee analysis and the proposal. So I'm going to essentially present for you tonight the presentation we did at that workshop for us to have further discussions about it and inform the public as to what my recommendations are. And I'd like to start by thanking the staff, Mr. Landon and his staff, for all the assistance that they gave us in preparing the analysis. And I agree with the assessment that the initial methodology as codified by the city was difficult to interpret and follow. And while there were elements of it that were useful, they weren't well defined enough to actually make it easy and straightforward to compute a fee. I hope what you'll see tonight and what you've seen in the prior workshop is a methodology that's a lot more straightforward, and it ties to the community's vision for those fees, for your recreation services. I just start out by pointing out that you are a growth-oriented community. 2000 population census, the population was about 33,000. That more than doubled over the next 10 years to over 75,000. And even with the current economic climate, you've continued to grow. The most recent estimate by the Bureau of Economic and Business Research at the University of Florida estimates your current population at just over 77,000. Now, one of the important numbers in our study is the projected population of build-out at 203,000. And the reason that is important is in this list of projects that are intended to be developed to provide recreation services to the community, there are a number of facilities that are singular in nature and all the facilities that we've invested in, that Palm Coast has invested in, are certainly shared throughout the community. So these are community-wide benefits, and you'll see when we get into the details of the fee calculation why that build-out number is important to this analysis. I want to share with you a little bit of the process, and as I did in my presentation at the workshop, I think the city has done a great job throughout the planning process for recreation services. And having done these types of studies for a number of communities, I rarely see this well-done planning effort that the city has been involved in to get us to the point where we are today. Now, initially, there was some recreation service levels and concepts that were put forth in your comprehensive planning documents. And one of those requirements of that comprehensive plan was to prepare a master plan for the recreation services. So as a follow-up to that comprehensive plan, and I believe it was done in the 2007-2008 timeframe, there was a master plan done. And I particularly like that master plan because not only did it identify a vision for the recreation services in a great amount of detail, including the types of facilities that you wanted to have for your community, it was also based upon a lot of community input. So when you go back and review that master plan, a significant amount of research was done and meetings were held with the public to get public input into that process. And I think that's clearly important to the success of your recreation goals. We're at the stage now, and you've been funding this plan through impact fees, but right now we've developed a current view of this. We are looking at a change in methodology, and I'll speak to that in a moment as well. But I want to start by saying that since 2007, the state of Florida actually implemented a statute regarding impact fees, and I want to briefly cover that with you so you're aware of the statutory requirements. And then I'm going to also talk about the purpose of the fees and what the Florida courts, which in conjunction with the impact fee, are the basis for how we've tried to develop this fee analysis. And with respect to the impact fee law, one requirement is that the fee be based on localized and recent data. And I think, again, we fulfilled that through this analysis. It also provides for accounting and reporting of the impact fee revenues and expenditures in a separate fund. And this is very important because when we collect these fees, they're dedicated to a specific purpose. They're maintained in a fund, and anyone can look at that fund and see the amount of impact fees that have been collected for recreation services and what those monies have been spent on. The third requirement by the statute was to limit administrative charges for the collection of the fees to actual costs. Our proposal does not have an administrative component in it. So theoretically, we could have added in, on top of the capital costs that we're trying to recover through the fee, an administrative fee to collect it and manage the process. We've chosen not to do that. The next one is that the law requires that 90-day notice be given before an increase in the fee. Originally, that law said before any change in the fee, but clearly if you're lowering the fee, there's usually not a lot of concern by those that are affected by it. So they've changed that law now to say that there must be a 90-day period before the effective date of an increase in the fees. And finally, and this is a requirement of your finance department, with your audits on an annual basis, an affidavit needs to be prepared that's addressed to the Auditor General that indicates that the city is in compliance with the impact fee statute. So those are the rules that came out of the impact fee statute. And you know, while they give us some basic guidelines, the case law that's been developed in Florida over the years, it gives us a little more specific requirements that we need to meet to have a valid impact fee. And perhaps, and again, you know, the basis for this fee comes from your home rule and growth management acts are cited often in the courts. But the most important one is probably well, let me start by saying the impact fee, the purpose of it is to collect for the capital needs of services that the city provides the community. So the impact fee cannot be used to pay for operating costs for recreation services, for the ongoing maintenance of facilities, for the staffing that is involved in the operations of your recreational department. The fee's purpose is to fund capital needs associated with increases in capacity to serve a growing population. So these fees are restricted to capital dollars, not operating dollars, and they must be tied to an increase in capacity to serve the public. Now, the courts have said that the fees must meet what they refer to as a dual rational nexus test. And behind that language is really a simple concept, and that is the fee should be based upon the facilities, the cost of the facilities, capital cost of the facilities that you want to use to provide recreational services. And in return, the dual aspect of that fee is that then once you've set the fee based on those, you need to spend the money on the facilities that you indicated that you use to develop the fee. So this is the dual nature of the rational nexus. Again, I mentioned that it is a capital cost. The fee should not be set up to create a windfall for existing communities. We can't fund all of our recreational needs on the growth going forward. If there's deficiencies in our services and facilities today, the fees cannot cure those kind of things. So it is intended for capacity to serve new growth. Now, that being said, you can recoup existing facilities that are out there that also provide for growth, much like we do in your water and wastewater impact fees. And then finally, there should be a resolution that explicitly states the purpose of the fees, how the monies are used, and this is tied very much back to that state law. So that's some of the basis for how we came up with the fees. We talked about in the first workshop that there are two basic methods, and there's a number of hybrids of this that you see in practice, but basically we have what we refer to as a standards approach versus a needs approach. And the standards approach was really the underlying approach that was in your current impact fee ordinance, although I don't know that I think the city would say that maybe it didn't meet some of these attributes that I've attributed to the standards approach, that it's simple to calculate, it's either based upon historical service levels or established standards. And we see this a lot in police and fire impact fees and roadways, where we have some population standard for the number of officers or for the trip miles and various capacity measurements that are used in roadways, and also the cost of expanding roadways is often developed as a standard. The improvements approach is forward-looking in nature. There is a capital plan that it's generally tied to. In this case, it's the master planning document that has guided us. And it is the approach you use, for example, in your water and sewer impact fees. And I think it lends itself well to recreational impact fees. And I'll speak to that again when we get into some of the projects as to why I believe that. When we looked at that master planning document and the workshop that the council did to discuss the future investments in facilities, approximately $132 million in projects were identified for the impact fee, for the recreational services for the community. Now, to date, you've already spent about $13.9 million in existing recreational facilities and activities. Now, as I understand it, when you came up with the initial fee, there was an effort made to try to value a lot of the properties that were donated properties when the city was incorporated. We've focused this fee strictly on the dollars that have been expended out of impact fee funds to date, and not any valuation of assets that are out there, because you do have assets that are beyond just these dollars, primarily in land, but we did not place a value on that because for the most part they were donated assets. And similarly, with respect to the grant funding, of that $13.9 million in existing investment, about $2 million of that was funded from grants. And again, we can't recoup those costs because they were an alternative funding source, and that's why you see that netted out in the
the calculation of the fees. Now, I said that I think this approach lends itself well to recreation impact fees. And the reason I believe that is that with respect to recreational activities, there's subjectivity and community goals that are built into this. And as a result, you have a number of special use facilities, we've called them here, that are things that if you drill down into the list of projects that council's already considered, they include a tennis facility, an aquatic facility, a facility for community service and a community center. So those are generally, I'll say they're one-time facilities. They're going to benefit the entire community. And so when we've come up with this plan, what we've done is come up with a pro forma plan that says that ultimately we estimate that the cost of your recreational program, the capital cost, is approximately $144 million. And it is designed to serve a population of approximately 203,000 people. So when we look at the per capita cost of your recreation services, that comes down to about $711 per capita to fund this program. And
Henry, excuse me, Mr. Mayor. Before you move.
Sure.
The 132 million, that list of categories for facilities, and I don't know if maybe Jose will need to answer this, but how many facilities does that represent?
Facilities as in?
That's a list
Individual
of
projects.
categories of, how many facilities are we funding out of 132 million?
Well, the categories include neighborhood parks, community centers. I don't.
Facilities.
I couldn't tell you how many facilities are within each of those categories.
Well, we have the list.
We have the list.
But maybe while Henry finishes this up, you can start counting.
Sure.
yeah, if you look at Table 2 in the report, there is a complete listing of all these projects.
Well, Table 2 is a list of required funds.
Well,
But
but it's
not-
broken down by, it's somewhat specific. You can go to it and find parks such as, under parks, Long's Landing, Holland Park. There's various facilities that are referred to. And I don't know that, how you put an exact number on some of these things because it may.
I can.
Okay.
I used your study.
Okay, well, I didn't count them up that way.
Okay, it's 59.
59 facilities, okay.
Okay, that's from your study that you presented in June or July.
Okay,
maybe you can
and so the definition of a facility that you used was an individual, an improvement within a park? Was that a?
No, I didn't use any existing parks. This is a new facilities.
Okay, all right.
So it might be a new neighborhood park, it might be a new
Yeah.
community park, it
Right.
might be a new community center.
Exactly.
It might, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, so again, starting with that per capita cost of $711, one of the things that needs to be recognized is we cannot expect future growth to pay that entire cost of that program. And as well, and let me go back here, we do want future growth, however, to pay a pro rata share of the existing investment in facilities. So again, we're looking at this as a pro forma total cost and what needs to be contributed from growth in the future on a fair share basis. So the way we came up with that, and this is again where that 203,000 population number becomes important, is if you look at where we are today in current population, you're roughly about 38% built out today. So what's shown on this tabulation here is the fact that we have given credit to the impact fee calculation for the fact that roughly 38% of this program should not be funded from growth going forward, but will have to be funded from some alternative funding sources that will ultimately either be perhaps through grants or through tax revenues. And in order to avoid the future growth from paying twice, if you will, we've made a credit roughly $50 million towards that $132 million in cost to be credited going forward. So in the end, our credit calculation came out to $247 per capita. And then, so applying the cost per capita and the alternative funding credit, we come up with a cost to be recovered from new growth of approximately $463 per capita. This fee, recreation impact fees, are typically not assessed or billed to new commercial growth, because the nexus is, the benefit is our residents. So we applied a 2.5 persons per household estimate. That's based on current Beaver numbers to come up with a proposed impact fee of $1,163. Now, the existing fee is at $1,264, so that's a fee decrease of approximately $101 from where you are currently. Now, in order to provide you some additional information, we did a comparison of impact fees charged by other communities. We incorporated into this some growth communities that are similar in terms of your growth profile going forward to the city of Palm Coast, and some of them are your neighbors like Daytona Beach and Port Orange. Claremont's not a neighbor, but both Claremont and Mount Dora are have been fast-growing communities in the past. Again, this wasn't intended to be comprehensive. At the far left-hand side, we've got the city of New Smyrna Beach, that's one of your neighbors, that's essentially a built-out community. Again, part of this proposal, one, there's no requirement that the impact fee needs to be set at 100% of the cost that is allocable to new growth. So some of these communities may have, by policy, set a lower impact fee than what their cost of services would imply. Also, each community, in this case, when we're talking about treatment plants for water and sewer service, those things are fairly standard these days among communities. When you build a new one, there's lots of regulation. With respect to recreation services, obviously that's a lot more subjective, and it's really the vision of the community that needs to be accounted for. And one I don't have on here, for example, the city of Wellington has some really high standards because, again, that's their community vision of what they want to have in terms of the types of facilities that they've put into the fee. Claremont is another one that has a very high standard for land. I believe their standard, one of the standards they use is 10 acres per 1,000 population. So again, there's other factors, there's a number of factors that go into all this. But I would submit that as a funding plan to fund this fee, and assuming that you want to use impact fees to fund a significant portion, particularly since you have roughly 68% of your growth still to come, to use this, which is a very viable source of funding, this fee should provide funds for that recreation program that has been identified. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Jose, and he's going to speak to the, I'm sorry. He's going to speak to the impact fee resolution changes.
Sure. I think, do I need to get into this, Mr. Landon?
Sure.
Sure, okay. So we have proposed some changes to the park impact fee as stated by Henry. Essentially, what we're going to do is incorporate the impact fee study as part of the ordinance, and the methodology would be incorporated into the new ordinance. In addition to that, the resolution, which will be part of a second reading of the ordinance, will include the fee itself, the dollar amount for that fee, including the administrative fee for charging based on actual cost. And included within that resolution is the requirement that we review the methodology and the impact fee every 3 years, I believe is what was discussed at City Council workshop.
Jose, while you're there, and once again, what Jose is describing is this, if City Council moves forward, these are the implementation documents. But Jose, also, could you touch base on Holland Park? I know it was brought to our
Sure.
attention that we didn't correct the Holland Park number,
Right.
if you will.
One of the total number of $132 million for future capital plan for parks does include Holland Park, and it includes the total price for the renovation of Holland Park. As Henry has stated, we can only use impact fees for new capacity within parks or creation of parks. And so we would have to back out of the Holland Park estimate or construction cost those facilities that are not capacity adding. If it's just the renovation of the playground as opposed to the expansion of the playground, then we need to remove that cost. Certainly a splash park is a new facility that and adds new capacity, something we didn't have before, then that could qualify for park impact fees.
So we're,
Yes, sir.
between the first reading and second reading, we'll make that
And we
minor
we will make that adjustment to the calculation, so that should bring down the impact fee, a little bit.
So I believe that's our presentation. At this point, I'll try to answer all your questions best I
Council
can.
questions? Mr. DiLorenzo.
Henry, I met with staff last week to try and think about the future. In 3 years, when it comes up for review again and we have completed projects, how does the methodology then work? And no one was exactly sure. We had some ideas how it might work, but I thought maybe you could give us some insight how you thought it would work. Would as a project is completed, would it move to the completed asset? Right, it's basically two numbers, right? It's the total number and the completed. Does it move to the completed asset number and then turn into an asset? And then you update the population number, and then you do the math again?
That's precisely what I see happening, is that particularly, keep in mind that these are estimates right now, construction cost estimates, and as I understand it, they were prepared by a third party. But as you get closer to actually constructing a community center, you're going to have a lot better information about what the exact cost of that's going to be. You're going to do engineering and design, et cetera. But in the meantime, as you build a facility, that cost is now known. So it comes off the list as a asset or as a project that might have, let's say it was a $1 million project and it cost you $886,000 to actually build it. That number would then become part of the fee, and we would remove that $1 million number because we now know the exact cost of that facility. And as we move through time, as these all get built into the recreation services asset base, they all ultimately should be better defined numbers.
So in a case like that, if once the pencil was sharpened and we got an exact number, it would come off of both then, I guess, because it would reduce. If it was less, it would reduce the total needed. Plus, it would, and once it was completed, it would go as an asset as the exact number. What about if another scenario I gave staff was if a private company, let's say a YMCA, comes in and builds an aquatic center, something that fits, our vision. Okay, then what would you do with it?
Well, again, I would suggest to you, and we see that happening in some communities. You would, if someone were to donate a baseball field or a tennis facility, and you felt that it met the community need, you'd back that facility out of the impact fee.
So that would come off the total number required?
Yes.
And then it would be adjusted?
Now, let me say this, that again, you want that nexus. You want to use those fees for the projects we've identified, but you also have the opportunity to review that list and add projects as well. So again, this is a pretty comprehensive list. I can't imagine
that we have a lot to add to it, if you will, but that would be the process. Now, keep in mind that there's a significant amount of this plan that's not funded, that $50 million credit. So in certain instances, like if you got a grant, that would really go to that portion. You wouldn't necessarily revise the fee because you got a grant, because we've got to come up with about $50 million in alternative funding.
Right, and I mean, your methodology assumes that by removing the grant before
It
the
removed
math is done.
all the alternative funding sources. But basically what the methodology did was just determine what is a fair share apportionment to growth. So everything else has to be funded from some other source if you're going to accomplish this plan. Now, the other thing that I didn't mention that I need to is, in addition to this credit to make sure that growth doesn't pay more than once for their fair share, there's also another credit mechanism that will be built into this ordinance, and that is in-kind credits. So if a developer provides facilities, not just someone that may donate a YMCA donating a facility, but if a developer of a DRI puts a park in, they will get credit against their impact fee requirements for those facilities that they constructed. Again, we have the cost of those things in here to give a basis to provide that credit, but it's not as if every one of these facilities will actually necessarily be constructed by the city. So that developer would pick up a credit towards the value of that park facility that they've installed within that development towards their impact fee costs. So that's intended in the ordinance. The other thing I would add about the new ordinance is we will not index the fee any further. In the past, you've been indexing it by CPI, and since these projects have been projected and some consideration was given to future cost inflation, there won't be any indexing of the fee on an annual basis.
Just to be clear, because you mentioned something there. In a scenario like you just said, in an in-kind donation where the developer developed the entire park and then gave it to the city, that would be a city asset and it would be counted as a city asset. But if a private provider came in with again, I'll use the YMCA because it's the easiest one to talk about, that would not be a city asset, so it would just come out of the total funding because we'd no longer need to build that facility, but it wouldn't change the asset.
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
All right.
Yeah, they wouldn't have to deed it over for you for
Right.
it to apply, for that to apply.
Sure. Okay.
Mr. Ferguson.
Yes, Henry, I've looked at the total study that was provided, and I try to understand impact fees as a % of funding for the total project. And you alluded to it just recently, or just a moment ago, that alternate funding would need to be added to subsidize the total amount. So my question is this, two-part. One is, if you look at the impact fee total over the next period of time to accumulate the fee, and you do the number of residences, it's somewhat less than 50% of the total that impact fee funds. How does that compare to other studies that you've done for other communities? You've shown us a breakdown of the fee itself and how it relates to other communities. What about the fee as a % of the total funding as a comparison? Do you have any data on that? And the second part of that is, we have data that we've collected impact fees up to now. What portion of the amount that we spent on recreational facilities have been funded by past impact fees? And how do they relate to one another?
Well, again, on your first question, I cannot cite those percentages, but it really depends on where you are in the growth curve and how the status of your community. Obviously, if I'm doing this fee and updating it for a community close to build out, I'm going to get a different answer than if I do it for a community that still has a lot of their growth in front of them. Again, I could do some research on that, but I don't have that with me to share with you.
Intuitively, is something less than 50% an appropriate number? Or?
Well, a lot of the communities that we've done these fees for,
are growing communities. So, you know, that's not unusual. But again, part of it too is what kind of facilities you have in the fee too, as well. Because if it was just land and parks, I would probably take a little different approach to this in terms of how I time the growth to the fee. There's a significant number of singular facilities here, like, again,
Big
tennis
ticket
items.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that is an important consideration in how I came up with the credit, because it's not just the new growth that's going to benefit from those big ticket items. So somehow we have to come up with an alternative funding source, because existing residents need to contribute to those as well. And similarly to the second question you asked, and I'll go back to that, I believe you were talking about this investment to date.
Right, and how much impact fee contributed to fund that.
And quite frankly, I did not reconcile that either. I'm sure that we could for you, but I did not do that in terms of exactly how many have been funded by impact fees. There may be some other city funds. The staff may want to address that. They may know better as to.
I don't have it off the top of my head, and Chris may be able to help, but
Well, that's certainly something we could have for the second reading.
sure, we can
It's
definitely get it.
kind of
Yes.
a curiosity item.
Yep. Good.
Mr. Lewis?
Just a quick question, simple question. But we have parks, neighborhood parks, community centers, and community parks, and we have a dollar value for those. How much of that is based on assumption of developers' input?
How these cost figures were used, As I understand it, you had a third party prepare the estimates when you did the master plan. And I couldn't tell you if we got input from specific developers, but maybe Jose can address that.
Is your question, Mr. Lewis, where did the estimates for developing a park came from? Yes, sir. It's within the park's master plan. It was prepared at the time that the consultant was preparing the master plan. And what they did was they basically took averages of different projects that they were involved with leading up to the time of the creation of the park's master plan, and used those average development costs. And the estimates does include permitting, design, and construction. Excuse me. And then index that into the future to account for inflation. And that's where those estimates came from. Yes.
Gotcha.
Other council questions? Seeing none, let's open the meeting to the public. Anyone from the public wish to be heard on this agenda item? Come up to the podium, give us your name, limit your contribution to 3 minutes.
Good evening, Council, Mr. Mayor. My name is Eric Phillips. I'm with the Flagler Home Builders Association Government Affairs Board. I just wanted to quickly touch on a few things. The current parks and recreation system, including 1,286.5 total acres with 15 developed facilities covering 367 acres. Currently, this 367 acres serves 38% of the build-out population of 77,068 people, with the total build-out being approximately 203,000, just like you just saw. The proposed parks and recreation system study includes a planning window of approximately 40 years, assumes construction of 50,172 new homes, and includes approximately 59 new facilities. Now, keep in mind, currently, we are at 38% build out, 77,000 people, and only needing 15 facilities to service those. And we're going to increase to 59 facilities for the additional growth. This also assumes construction cost of up to $375,000 per acre to construct these parks. We have seen some of the averages of around $140,000. If you look at some of the recent ones, Waterfront Park, Central Park, Ralph Carter Park, and Indian Trails Sports Complex. We also see possibly subsidizing the new western growth in the county, where only 24% of the growth will occur in the west. But we will spend around $35 million, or 34% of the budget that you've looked at in the west. The master plan estimates more than $12 million annually in maintenance and operation costs that will have to come from taxes to pay for this. Our recommendations are to reduce the 40-year estimated cost by 20%, and you've already discussed the issue with the Holland Park items that don't appear to be able to be paid by impact fees. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Jack Cal, Palm Coast. If a builder or whoever it is decides to build on the west side, now that impact fee, does that stay on the west side? In other words, can you take that impact fee for this development and say, well, we're going to build a park over over by the river, by the
Yellow Lakes.
But then another question is, if the builder decides that he wants to put a park, does he have to do that with the consent of the city? Or can he just say, well, I'm going to put a park here just to get a discount on my impact fee? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hello, my name is Robbie Richmond with the Flagler County Home Builders Association. There's just a few things I wanted to talk about. The parks that exist in Flagler County are in excess of 3 times the size of Magic Kingdom and Disney World. This methodology that's used to get this study and put it together, it doesn't take into consideration Flagler County parks, Florida State parks, federal parks, local city municipality parks that are neighboring cities to the city of Palm Coast. And even if you were to take those studies into consideration, the study doesn't take into consideration our beach, which is a recreation, I would say, probably gets utilized more than any other in this county is our beach. It doesn't take into consideration our bike paths, which has been touted per capita. We have the most bike paths per capita in the nation, if I'm not mistaken. That was an article that came up not too long ago. That's not taken into consideration. The methodology that was previously used for the previous study, the Home Builder Association did a study on that, and there was basically no need for a park impact fee any longer. Well, now a new methodology is used, and now, okay, now we need an impact fee again because a new methodology was used to put this study together. Our impact fees are a hindrance to our industry, which we're one of the largest employers for this county. It does make a difference to us. Whenever I have discussions with customers with our company, and you're talking about the city of Palm Coast, and the discussion comes up about how much our impact fees are, they're 2 times what you can buy a lot for in Palm Coast right now. They're more than 10% of what the average house price, sale price is in this county right now. I mean, that's more than 10% just in impact fees to build a new house. That's not reasonable. I mean, and everybody kind of thinks, well, it's going to come out of the builder's profit. Well, no, it isn't. It's just a cost. It's an expense we pass on to the consumer, which is a lot of them are current property owners within the city of Palm Coast. It's putting a large burden on them, and it's hindering construction to be occurring in the city of Palm Coast, which would be a benefit to the city. That's tax revenue. Those are vacant lots that already have infrastructure in place. There's already roads and paving that the city is having to maintain and take care of. If there's homes located on those lots, that's additional tax base and revenue coming into the city. So I just ask that you consider all those things. I mean, we have ample park facilities in this county. We really do. I mean, if you look at all, not just the city of Palm Coast park facilities, but you look at all the park facilities that are available, you look at our beach system, and you look at all the biking paths that we have, there's a lot of recreational things that are available to the population to utilize. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. Next speaker. Seeing no one approach the podium, we'll close public portion of the meeting. Let's come back to a couple of the questions that were asked. Question of, I'm going to call it proportionment. We have 3 large DRIs on the west side of Palm Coast. Can the developer put a park in and engender a credit without input from the city? And then the other piece of that, proportionality. How do you determine where these facilities are? Is it proportional to the population that paid for them? So on and so forth. That's a tricky question when you come to the single unique facilities. But let's start with can a builder arbitrarily put a park in and claim an impact fee credit without the city's approval?
Sure.
Sure. Go ahead, Jose. Sure. Short answer.
The way it usually works with our DRIs is that as part of the negotiation for that development order, we address the different infrastructure needs, and I'm counting also parks as part of those infrastructure needs. The amount of parks that we usually put in the development order is tied to the number of dwelling units they're proposing and the impact of those number of dwelling units that are going to, the number of dwelling units that, and its impact on level of service, and in this case we used the 8 acres per 1,000 people. Can they just put in a park? Usually it's negotiated, and typically what we're going by policy in our comp plan, we try to locate a park site in a new development like a DRI adjacent to a school site as a policy of our comprehensive plan. The other park sites that they have, certainly when the smaller maybe individual neighborhood sites, neighborhood parks, when they come in with a site plan to propose a new residential development, it could be at that time that they'd like to propose to the city that, well, as part of this 500-unit residential subdivision I'm proposing, I want to include within that a neighborhood park. And so there is a negotiation, or there is a proposal that comes from the developer for where that park site will go. The one thing we have in our ordinance is, of course, that we would only give credit if those parks are open and available to the public. And if, and of course, the amount of credit they get would be based on the appraisal of that land and an engineer's cost of what that development really is. So park, like any other development in the city, would require a permit. So they certainly wouldn't go through, just all of a sudden pop up and say, here's a park for you.
Short answer is, if it's a public park, no, it would take city approval. If it's a private park that's just for that development, then yes, as long as it meets their zoning, but they wouldn't get any credit for the private park.
And I think the important thing, we had a discussion, City Council had a discussion of a proposed development, a small development on some isolated land, and there was an adjacent quasi-island that was going to be deeded to the city for a park, but the only way to get to it would be through a gated community. Thank you, but no thank you.
Right. Second part of the question, Mayor, is that no, we don't have districts, if you will. There is a possibility and sometimes of doing that, but ours does not propose districts, so there is no...
Clearly, a neighborhood will be proportionally distributed.
Right.
If you don't have a neighborhood, you don't have a neighborhood park.
But any park fees collected throughout Palm Coast would be spent in Palm Coast.
The first speaker did an analysis based on acreage, and there's a fallacy in there, I believe, because so many of these unique facilities, whether it be a community center or whatever you fill in the blank with that one-of-a-kind facility, that cost has no proportionality to acreage. And then the last speaker urged us to consider all of the other recreational facilities that exist in Flagler County, including, but not limited to, the beaches. This plan was based on input from our residents who knew very well that there were beaches, but in addition to the beaches, we want, and you can fill in the blank with whatever that may be. So if your only recreational facility was a beach, you would be a very narrow type of recreational community.
There'd be a lot of beaching going on.
Back to...
Could I add
Sir.
something on one of the comments? Because again, I think part of the analysis is that, you know, you've achieved the standard for the current population level, therefore the fee should go to zero. Well, that doesn't very well provide for future need, and this is all about collecting from future homes and growth. And I would submit to you, if you decided that you've spent your $12 million, and you're not going to spend another dime, I think it would still be fair to have an impact fee so that future residents contribute to that, and you recoup those monies and use them because the current citizens have invested that $12 million. So even if you didn't spend another dime, I don't think that would negate an impact fee per se. So, and that's kind of an argument at the edge of the logic. But my point is that why should the next round of growth get a zero impact fee when you've spent money in the past, you intend to spend money in the future? The point of this is, the way we've done it is the entire community contributes. The entire community will contribute through this fee.
Okay, back to City Council. Additional questions, comments?
Well, the comment, Your Honor, I mean, the impact fees are based upon what might happen in the future, not what's happening in the here and now. And it does get reviewed in 3 years. So, you know, right now it looks like a good plan. And if the growth goes the way we're thinking it might, in some cases hoping it might, then we're prepared for it. The worst thing would be have a large influx of population and not have the facilities to provide for the amenities that they expect. And every time I speak before a group anywhere in the city, if there's any kind of a complaint, there's nothing for our young people to do. You know, it's too far to go down to Ralph Carter Park. There's nothing in my neighborhood. So, you know, what are you going to do about it?
Mr. Lewis.
Just a quick comment. When we talk about having enough parks now, we're not looking into the future, really. If we have enough parks now, then we go to 203,000 people. What do? I think that the consultant says that the projection is based on the fact that the future growth is based on the fact that you have impact fees to pay for that future growth. And I don't believe we have enough parks to handle that future growth. When you look at Flagler County and the neighboring facilities, people in Palm Coast really are concerned, according to what I saw in the survey, about what is the city of Palm Coast doing for me and for my tax dollars. So I think we should, you know, if we're going to project forward, the people coming in have to pay their fair share. I think that's only fair.
Mr. DiLorenzo.
Are you surprised?
Not in the least.
I was on the Futures Committee, the Flagler County Futures Committee that did the comprehensive planning. And if I remember correctly, there's over 40,000 acres of parkland in Flagler County, which is a great number. But I do think it's something to consider. I understand why it's not part of this discussion, but there's a lot of facilities in Flagler County. On Friday, a few of us attended the BAC Expo, and one of the speakers quoted Max Dupree, and he said, Max Dupree said, "The first responsibility of leaders is to define reality." And this funding ordinance validates or defines the Park Master Plan as reality. And I wonder if it really is reality. First of all, it's a planning horizon of around 40 years. And I say around 40 years because The University of Florida has only estimated out to 2040, and that's only 27 years from now. So doing a little math, it's somewhere around 40 years. We do lots of visioning. We've never visioned anything out 40 years. What was Palm Coast like 40 years ago? Well, I-95 was a couple years old, and I think there was a couple dozen houses here in 1973. 35 years ago, the first personal computers came out. They had 64 kilobytes. My phone in my pocket has 16 gigabytes. 40 years ago, you stood up and you put a band around your waist and you turned it on and you vibrated the pounds away, and that was called exercise.
Didn't work.
No.
Maybe you did.
Well, 40 years ago, I was 2. Thank you, Bill. And today's my daughter's birthday, and she turns 5. So we're talking about planning for her recreation needs when she's 45. But we don't know what recreation will be in the future. We're thinking, should we define that now, our entire recreation needs for 40 years from now? And why are we trying to define it now? We have a mechanism that's going to allow us every 3 years to adjust this plan. And we can start with a plan now that's closer to reality. Second, it assumes a build-out population of 203,000. We're currently serving 77,000 residents, or 38%, with 15 developed parks. And there's boating and there's beaches, and we've had that discussion already. The Park Master Plan estimates maintenance and operation costs of $11.9 million annually, another almost $12 million annually from taxes for parks and operations maintenance. And I think I should pause. I was talking to my wife about this over the weekend, and she says, "You sound like a know-it-all." And I said, well, I'm sorry.
That's your job.
You're supposed to be. She actually called me snarky, and I said, does that mean I'm a know-it-all? And she said, yeah, yes. Well before I was on this board, came to the city in May of 2010 and said there's something wrong with the park impact fee study. And now, 3.25 years later, here we are, and we're talking about it. So if I sound like a know-it-all, I apologize, but this is a lot of what I've looked at over the past several years. Henry mentioned that state impact fee law requires recent and local data. Well, we have 4 diverse local examples of park construction. The Seminole Woods Park costs $99,000 an acre for development. The Indian Trails Park costs $112,000 per acre. Central Park, $130,000 per acre. And Waterfront Park, perhaps our most beautiful and favorite park by our citizens, also costs $130,000. This study for community parks estimates $375,000 per acre. Again, I say, is that our reality, or can we define our reality a little better? If we reduced just those construction costs to an estimate of $250,000 an acre, still almost twice what we are currently paying, it would cut $10 million out of this. The plan also calls for 3 additional community centers when there's a list up there that says, there's a line item that says community center, $30 million. So that's for 3 of them, plus renovation of our current one. It also calls for $7.9 million for parks in the State Road 100 DRI. That DRI has been foreclosed on. It's in, the bank owns it. It's in non-compliance with the city, and it's in this plan. The Palm Coast Park DRI is another $3.75 million. And at first I didn't recognize the Palm Coast Park DRI, and then I said, wait a second, what is this? That is the park that we have an agreement with Player Development Academy for them to build and operate a soccer location for us, a soccer school for us here in the city. A private developer is going to build that for us, and we have an agreement with them, for a lease agreement with them. And also, there's $3.25 million for an addition to the tennis center. Now, our tennis center loses money by the month, and this plan suggests that we add another $3.25 million to it. So I realize that we reviewed those facilities at an earlier time, but given the opportunity to look at them a little bit closer, look at the 59 new facilities, 13 canoe launches included, and I think that we should sharpen our pencil, do a better job of defining our reality, and reduce the total future investment from the start, understanding that we're going to look at it every 3 years, and we will have the opportunity to make changes as needed. So my suggestions is, well, we touched on Holland Park. My guess, staff couldn't give me a total on that. It may be $3 or more million in replacement and renovation costs that are non-capacity adding. If we reduce the construction cost estimate to $250,000, we remove one community center out of the 3, that would still give us an opportunity in the future to build one located on the south central part of our city, this being the north central part of our city, and also one in the western part of the city. We eliminate the Palm Coast Park DRI. If it doesn't come to fruition, fine, we put it back in the plan. But we already have a plan for it. We signed a lease with them. I'm confident they're going to get it done. And remove the tennis center until someone can prove to me that we need to place an addition. And I've asked several times if there's an economy of scale problem at that tennis center, and no one's been able to give me an appropriate answer. So I would like to make a motion to approve this agenda item with the caveat that we make those changes, specifically reduce the cost estimate for community parks to $250,000 an acre, remove one community center at $4.25 million, eliminate the Palm Coast Park DRI park at $3.75 million, and eliminate the tennis center addition at $3.25 million. Again, with the understanding that they could be added back in at a future time. I don't know what that'll all come to because I can't estimate the Holland Park changes, but it would make a significant change, and it would reduce the overall future city investment.
There's a motion on the floor to approve with a significant reduction in the master plan. Is there a second to the motion? Is there a second to the motion? Hearing no second, motion fails for lack of a second. Mr. Ferguson.
I didn't have.
Okay.
Your Honor, if I may, I mean, I don't want Mr. DiLorenzo's motion to die without comment. It's an awful lot to drop on the table at one time, but I think it's important to note that for those of us that came from places other than Florida, myself, I came from Missouri, where communities grew that had no plan, and by the time they determined that there was nothing for kids to do or recreational activities for the family, there was so much urban sprawl that crime went rampant, and the place just went to hell in a handbasket. I think it's important for us to have a vision. Nothing that's put on the table today, either by this proposal or by what Mr. DiLorenzo is suggesting, none of these things are carved in stone. If I were to change anything, I guess, would be to recommend that the calculation of the impact fees for recreational purposes be done more frequently than every 3 years. I don't disagree with what Jason is saying. I just there's not enough time to digest it that allows me to vote on it, or I might have.
Something that we need to realize, and you've said initially the proposal was to revisit this every 3 years. That gives us and our successors the opportunity to look at this and see if this is reality, as Mr. DiLorenzo points out. The problem that I have, if you start removing things now, and then a later council says, no, we really do need that unique single facility, you're going to be disproportionately affecting those new residents. The thing to remember, if there is no growth, then there is no need, and if there is no growth, then there are no impact fees collected. So this is a self-regulating process. And the comment that Mr. DiLorenzo made, estimating $11 million in maintenance costs, well, you'll only have those maintenance costs if you've built those projects, and you'll only build those projects if you have the increased population. So 10, 20, 30 years from now, if you're approaching a 200,000 population, you will be generating more tax dollars. Even if we stay to the rollback rate for the next 20 years, you'll be generating that necessary money. Those are my comments.
I think a plan is as what we have heard tonight is really worth looking at as a plan. And that's what a plan, is designed to project in the future as to what you want to do. It doesn't mean that you're going to do those things, but at least you have some guidelines. And I think what we have tonight, what was presented to us tonight, are guidelines. Now, those numbers may go up or down, who knows? But as the mayor says, if you don't have it in there, then it's kind of hard to put it in there later on. I think we should accept what was presented to us tonight and move forward. And as we move forward, if there's a case to make adjustments, and if Jason's going to be here, if you can show where there are adjustments that make sense, I'm sure the consultant will either agree or disagree or show where it needs to be, well, it needs to stay in place. But I think what he's presented tonight was well thought out. It gives us a plan. It gives us a method of calculating that, as Jason said, 3 years ago, I remember he bringing this idea or concern to the council. Well, it took us 3 years to get here. Now we have something different to look at, and now we have something that we can at least get some reasonable numbers on. So my thinking is we accept the plan or the suggestion or recommendation, and as we move forward, whether it's 2 years or 3 years, we make those adjustments as we go.
Is that a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Moved and second. Further discussion on the motion. The motion is to approve this ordinance on first reading. It gives us a period of time to reflect on the comments we've heard from the Home Builders Association and from Mr. DiLorenzo. And I will be curious, because at the second reading, we will have the revision that you talked about, removing the Holland Park component. So there will be a lower number in 2 weeks, regardless of what we do.
Mayor, if I may, we can also take a look at Mr. DiLorenzo's other issues and make sure that they're accurate and we agree with them or disagree with them, and evaluate those during the 2 weeks and bring those back
Our
too.
consultant and our staff has heard his comments, and we can certainly look at them.
Yes.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call vote, please.
Vice Mayor McGuire?
Yes.
Councilmember DiLorenzo?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferguson?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Mayor Net?
Yes.
Mayor, this motion passes 5-0.
Thank you very much. Agenda item number 5, an ordinance relating to the Unified Land Development Code regulating exterior colors. Mr. Reichman.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. This is an ordinance of the City of Palm Coast, Florida, amending Section 130206, Exterior Colors, of Chapter 13 of the city's Unified Land Development Code for clarification of text. It's amending Section 14.02 glossary of Chapter 14 of the Unified Land Development Code to add a definition for colors, providing for codification, conflicts, providing for severability, and an effective date.
Mayor, City Council, this is another one of those issues that I think we all agreed it needed to be corrected. And we've had a very positive process here where staff has worked with the representatives from the home builders, other interested parties, including our Business Assistance Center representatives, to come up with a little different methodology to make sure we stay consistent with Palm Coast, but also get rid of some of the conflicts that we were seeing that were unnecessary. Constance is going to give this presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Landon. Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, council members.
Constance, those are all the new colors? Say no.
For accent, yes.
Move the microphone closer to you.
To me. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the record, I'm Constance Bentley. I'm a planner in the Community Development Department, and I will be discussing some of the recommended changes for the Unified Land Development Code color regulations, primarily exterior colors. Back in May, the Flagler Home Builders Association requested that staff revisit the Land Development Code primarily for purposes of clarification, consistency with the past practices, and flexibility. Staff presented the recommended changes to Planning Board on October 16th, and they unanimously approved the code, the recommended changes, excuse me. I will also discuss a little bit of the community character, past practices, and requested changes. Why do we want to regulate colors and community character? Because we may not desire to have a Hello Kitty home next door to us. Although it is cute and it's nice, it doesn't say Palm Coast. Okay?
Not sure what it does say.
Nor do we want certain other colors next door to us. Community character for the city of Palm Coast was not done by accident, it was done by design. When ITT created the 47,000 plus residential lots, they designed a community character by creating setbacks, roof heights, colors, architectural features, all these elements together define the community's character and appeal, and color's one aspect of that. The Palm Coast Community Service Corporation was established back in the 90s to regulate those architectural aspects in the community character. And when Palm Coast became a city in 1999, the staff worked to create a land development code that was adopted in 2008 to be consistent with the past practices. As part of past practice for residential development, the Palm Coast Community Service Corporation established an architectural review committee that reviewed colors and architectural features for compatibility. They reviewed compatibility of colors between the roof, the walls, the accents, and did a very thorough review of single-family residential homes. They used the Munsell Light Reflected Value system that has been incorporated into our land development code, and I'll go into a little more with that. It allowed for accent colors outside of that light reflected value, and also for some darker earth tones. The light reflected value scale is from 0% to 100%, black being 0, white being 100. They allowed for any color to be used under pastel, which would fall under 80% white to 100% white, and then various earth tone colors, that came darker in the 30% range. When the city, again, was established in 1999, they felt the need to also develop regulations for our main corridor, which was Palm Coast Parkway, for our commercial components. And they brought in a lot of the same aspects that were used with the residential development. with the use of pastels and earth tones, and also using the light reflective value. Stayed away from drab colors, loud clashing colors, excluded fluorescence, and limited the accent colors to on any one elevation, and also some more flexibility with earth tones. Another past practice was with plan unit developments, which are known as master plan developments today. Historically, they were regulated by their own architectural review boards. Palm Coast Community Service Corporation did not review for master plan developments, and the city did not review for master plan developments initially until the Land Development Code in 2008.
Question. That's history. So history would say that's PUD.
Right.
Okay. Master plan didn't come till later.
That's correct. PUD is now known as master plan development in today's code.
Correct.
Some of the changes that were discussed and brought about in regards to clarification of the code was for accent colors. Basically, accent colors can be any color under the sun, except for prohibited colors. And they are limited to a certain percentage of the elevation. Another thing that needed to be clarified was defining some of the earth tones and the prohibited colors, and also showing some of the differences between residential and non-residential color requirements. This is an example of an accent color being black, which is outside of the light reflective value, and it's a darker color. And most of these pictures are homes in Palm Coast, so past practice allowed for the darker accents.
Constance, you're talking about the shutters there, I guess, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
That's considered an accent, as well as trims. In the Palm Coast commercial corridor, we show an accent color of orange for Home Depot, limited on the elevation. As an example of some of the earth tones that were allowed in the past but not fully and well defined in the Land Development Code that we needed to clarify is colors such as terracotta and sage and olive. And prohibited colors are more defined. Also, in showing the differences in single-family residential and multifamily and non-residential development, you can have variated colors between massing techniques and between stories or combination thereof. In regards to consistency with past practice, we made some language changes to accept out the PUDs as they were before, which is known as master plan developments today, to accept out front entry doors and allow for darker earth tone garage doors, just to be consistent with what was done in the past. This is an example of Grand Haven, who their architectural review committee regulated the architectural elements of their single-family homes as well as colors, and they did the job very well on their own without the city having to do reviews for them. This is an example of a different colored front door and an example of a darker garage door.
That still blows my mind.
In regards to flexibility, they want darker earth tones for walls, which were done in the past, and darker earth tones for garages, including black.
Constance, requested changes, requested by whom? Who asked for changes like this?
I'm going to say it was a request between both the builders and staff, because oftentimes we have conversations in regards to interpretation. And it's not that we didn't agree, it's just the interpretations weren't clear. So it was a continual conversation, and when you get new staff, it became a conversation again.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
So this is an example of a little bit darker earth tone. And it's an example of a black garage door. Again, these are homes in Palm Coast. This has a black garage door. And this is another styled home in a community with darker garage doors and trim. So staff would like to recommend approval for City Council on the amendments made to the Land Development Code for exterior colors.
I'm sorry, could I just add, during the planning board workshop, we had a workshop with the planning board and during the public hearing as well, that we did have some support letters from such as Palm Coast Holdings. Clint Smith had showed up for our meeting. He was not able to make it tonight, but in support of that project, we had received letters, and they did had some testimony during the public comment during the planning board as well. Just wanted to add that.
At the end of the presentation?
Yes.
Council questions. Mr. Lewis.
Historically, Ray, and you can back me up on this if you recall, Home Depot accent color, I think you'll find that nowhere else in Florida will you see that accent color, because I think they changed their color because we asked them to, or we insisted back then. So that's not, well, for them, I think that was a concession they made for us.
Yeah, they, if you recall, when Home Depot was here, we had the overlay district for the Palm Coast Corridor overlay, and it did regulate it to a certain extent of what Constance pointed out, about 20% of using for the accent color. So they had to comply with our overlay district, and kind of what the proposal is here is to be consistent, to stay consistent, and to clarify within the ordinance that those same elements for commercial would still stand today.
The other thing is, you said that the requested changes were made by others, and I think you mentioned home builders and others. I don't know who the others are, but who would want a black garage door? You would.
Say what?
Who would, I mean, that's a request to have a black garage door as one of our considered colors?
Actually, there are black garage doors already existing, like the homes that are there. It's in the past, garage doors were not reviewed like they are today with today's land development code. And a lot of the newer designed homes that are coming in have a style that they want these darker garage doors. A lot of them are walnut, some are black. It depends on the trim on the home. And so there is a desire, and homeowners requesting to have the use of the dark doors.
I can see darker or earth tone doors, but this is the first, well, I don't recall ever someone asking for a black color for a garage door. You have some history on that?
Yeah, Mr. Lewis, I think, as Constance had pointed out, some of the trends have also changed with some of the new, like you pointed out, one of the homes that had the darker features and the dark garage doors, so you had some trends. But some of the past practices, specifically with the covenants and restrictions in Palm Coast, the idea was, they had the base, the majority of the house had to be a certain color, had to meet a certain light reflective value. So the idea was some of your 20% of your trims to give individuals in their house that artistic appeal, that they have the ability to, accent and highlight, and to be able to have that ability to do those on 20% of the building. So that was kind of the idea.
I can guarantee if you put a black garage door in Grand Haven, they'll chase you out of there.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons for, you know, going back to what the past practices are. Like Grand Haven is pretty much built out or getting close to being built out. So they had a specific architectural theme back in the 70s that they still maintain with their covenants and restrictions. So in some instances, it's almost where, with our land development code, without the changes, you know, are permitting or allowing things that might not be to their character of a planned unit development or a master plan development. So that's what we're proposing here is, hey, you've been doing the your reviews for your association, continue to do that.
Well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
If I can add,
Mr. Di Lorenzo.
The old is the new, I think, in housing trends. If you look in the Woodlands and along Florida Park, I think you see a lot of darker accent colors, darker garage doors. So I think it's, you know, things, what comes around goes around, you know.
Other council questions? Questions? Seeing none, let's open the meeting to the public. And for the public wish to be heard on this agenda item.
Jack Carroll, Palm Coast. If I want to paint my house, do I have to come to you and say, this is the color I'm going to paint it, and do I get your permission? And do I pay a fee? You know, everything you do is a fee. So, but I heard, I don't know if I heard right or wrong, but they said you're going back to the ITT days when everything was, you know, planned and determined. Well, if we're going to go back to the ITT days, I remember when I moved here, you couldn't park your car on your driveway overnight. I remember that. That was part of the whatever they call it. Right. So if you're going to go back all the way. Don't go back on just one thing. No, go back all the way and let's do it all over again and see how it comes out. But no, I wouldn't paint my dog black.
Thank you, Jack. We'll get an answer to your question. Next speaker.
Thank you. Again, my name's Eric Phillips with the Flagler HBA, and I just want to take this opportunity to thank the council for approving the city staff to look into the the changes to the paint color code, because I do think, just like was mentioned earlier, there were some things that were causing some bottlenecks and confusion on selecting colors, and I believe this will take care of the problem. And as far as just to comment on the darker garage doors, this is a trend that we are seeing with the darker trim and accent colors, and if things like a black pair of shutters, a black front door, it's starting to be a trend to also paint that garage door black as well. So anyway, thank you. That's it.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm Gretchen Smith, Government Affairs Director at the Flagler County Chamber. And on behalf of the Chamber, I'd like to express our support for easing the rules on paint selection as it relates to commercial buildings. We all want to maintain the aesthetic appearance of our community. We don't want to be next to the Hello Kitty house. However, if the rules about commercial paint selection discourages a new business from either relocating or building a new facility here, it's definitely time for the City Council to strike a balance between aesthetics and economic development.
Thank you. Next speaker. Seeing no one approach the podium, we'll close the public portion meeting, come back to council. But first, Mr. Carroll's question. He wants to paint his house. What is the approval process? And is there a fee associated?
You do not need a permit to paint your house, and there is no fee. It is advisable before you get started to come ask us if that color would be acceptable. It's a whole lot easier to ask permission than have one of your neighbors turn you in, and then we have to take code action against you. It doesn't require city approval, but if you don't follow the code, we will take code action. So I strongly advise people, trim colors, house colors, come ask, no fee. Correct, Constance?
That's absolutely correct.
If City Council approves this, I think we should do a proactive outreach to the paint stores, to the Home Depots, to the Lowe's, to the purveyors of paints, just to advise them what these changes are. And I am reasonably certain with the home builders, are painters, house painters a member of your association? Typically yes, typically no, or some?
Some, yeah.
Well, again, I think the home builders who at least were part of the initiation of this discussion, I think it's incumbent upon you to advise your members of the changes.
It's
a lot easier, as Mr. Landeboy, it's a lot easier to get it right the first time.
The major paint manufacturers are members. Sherwin-Williams and PPG are both members. The representative from PPG helped us a lot with trends.
Okay.
And trying to look at trends and see what matched the aesthetics for Palm Coast, but also took a look at current trends.
Thank you. Additional questions, comments, or a motion?
Move to approve.
Second. Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call vote, please.
Your Honor, before we do this,
sorry.
we had a question from the lady from the Chamber of Commerce about commercial buildings. Have we lost a potential commercial entity because we wouldn't let them have the colors they wanted?
Not that I know of. Have we had some very lengthy discussions? Yes. Probably one of the commercial establishments that created the Palm Coast overlay would be an appliance store towards the west end of
John's Appliance.
yes, and you know that type of color today would not be permitted, I believe, under our
But
current
if theoretically speaking, if a company or a concern wanted to put a facility in Palm Coast and their color was identified with their brand, if you will, would we stand in the way of that?
We would require their main structure to meet the code and their trim to meet the code, yes.
That probably needs to be discussed
But
some
this-
other time.
And maybe Ray,
Well,
this helps.
Yeah, Mr. McGuire, you know, I've been with the city for 10 years and going through, I don't know how many hundreds of site plans, and we rarely, you know, you might have a developer who may come who's doing a commercial business, and they know that each community pretty much has, not all, but a lot of communities have their own standards, and a lot of them are willing to come into a community and meet those character standards, and we rarely has had any.
But a lot of businesses also have their own brand. I mean, the Carrabba's that we have looks like the Carrabba's that we had in St. Charles, Missouri. It's laid out the
Right.
same, and the same with Golden Corrals. You've seen one, you've seen them all. That's their brand.
Well, if I may add, actually, many times, like Golden Corral probably has more stone, probably has more architectural features because of our requirements.
But my point is that people identify with the way they look.
Absolutely, and that is why we have to work with them to make that happen. And you know, the other thing I must point out is not just us. Let's take the town center. They've got to go through an architectural review committee at the town center before they ever get to us. And by that time, it's usually pretty easy from our standpoint. Same thing was true with a place like I believe even you use Carrabba's and Golden Corral. Cobblestone, they all have their brand too for that commercial area. We're working with Palm Harbor right now, the same concept. So it is it's a cooperative type effort.
Can I add, it was in reverse as well. A lot of them came in feeling like they couldn't use their brand, when in fact our code is flexible enough where they were allowed to use their brand in many ways. So it worked in reverse as well. It's very flexible.
I hate to think that a business ruled us out as a potential site because they couldn't bring their identifying brand, if you will, of structure and/or color combination into our city. I wouldn't be real happy to hear that.
And that hasn't happened.
It better not either.
But the proposed code allows for some more flexibility, opening up some of those earth tones that meet our character.
Now, this actually helps in this, that effort,
Right.
this proposed ordinance.
I feel better.
Further council questions, comments, motion?
Move to approve.
We already did that.
Do we have a motion and a second? That's right, we did. All right, whatever. I'll hard to do it twice. Roll call vote, please.
Vice Mayor McGuire?
Yes.
Councilmember DiLorenzo?
Yes.
Councilmember Ferguson?
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis?
Yes.
Mayor Nets?
Yes.
Mayor, this motion passes 5-0.
Thank you very much. Agenda item number 6, resolution approving the purchase of golf carts. Mr. Landon.
You know, I learn more about golf carts than I care to know. You know, this is a great example of taking the easy route was not necessarily the most cost-efficient route. Chris Quinn came to me when we were talking with the lease company that City Council approved for replacing the golf carts at our golf course because that lease agreement has expired and it's time to replace them. And pointed out that this is the only moving equipment that we have that's not in our fleet fund, and that we are not having the department, in this case golf course, lease them from us. And he proposed something that would save the golf course money and also actually have revenue to the fleet fund. And so instead of just moving forward, I said, sounds like a great idea. Chris, why don't you present it to City Council? And that's what he's going to do right now.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening, Chris.
Good evening. Just a little bit of background. Our original lease for our golf carts commenced when the golf course opened, which is hard to believe it's already 4 years ago. It was a lease with E-Z-Go and expired actually on November 1st of this month. Just seemed like yesterday, September 2013, we received a number of quotes through Kemper's purchasing program to replace the golf carts that were under lease. Those are the main quotes we received and the various leasing rates. And then City Council had already approved to go ahead and go forward with the lease agreement for Club Car, which was the best overall package. This is the inventory of the carts. A cafe cart, 2 maintenance carts, 70 electric golf carts, and a driving range harvester.
Do those go by any other term?
Not that I'm aware of. Again, our current lease, which is just ending, was $5,451 a month, 48 months. The approved lease was a little bit less, $5,385 a month for 48 months, and it included a 5.5% lease rate or interest rate. As the city started down the path of working with the leasing companies, we came across a number of insurance issues, which we discussed in more detail at the workshop. But basically, what the leasing company wanted from us, we really couldn't and would not want to do. When Mr. Linden and I started talking about, other options, as he had mentioned, this is the only rolling stock equipment that we have under the city's umbrella that is not part of our fleet fund, which has been very successful up to this point. The total purchase amount of the carts is a little over $300,000. What I went ahead and did was calculate a lease rate at 2% for the fleet fund over 48 months, the same time period the regular lease would be. That would represent about a $9,000 a year annual savings to the golf course. At 2%, it would also be nearly double the return we're currently getting on our investments of available cash within the fleet fund. and that's based on the last 3-year average.
Chris, how did you arrive at the 2%? What the lease rate we're paying now? More than twice that, isn't it?
Yes.
Why did you decide on 2%?
Honestly, I looked at what we were getting for a rate of return on our current investments, what we expected to get, which is just over 1%. I figured the fleet fund deserved to get double its normal return, roughly, if it was going to go ahead and finance this transaction. Of course, we have flexibility in that, but I thought that that was only fair to the fleet fund.
So is it if we said the $9,000 annual savings, we could say that that figure is conservative based on that lease rate, could we not?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
So the payment, the golf course payment to the fleet fund would be, like I said, about $9,000 less, a little over $4,600 a month, which is good savings for the golf course to help the golf course meet its goal of trying to break even. This is the fleet fund 5-year CIP, kind of 5-year lookout, fund balance lookout. And I really want to bring your attention to the bottom, which represents the amount of available funds at the end of each year. Our goal is to stay around $3.5 million. We have next year or two, we've got quite a large amount of large equipment purchases, some of which will be on the consent agenda tonight. But this transaction really is not a hindrance to the fleet fund in any way, and this really is one of our most successful programs in establishing our own fleet leasing fund, at smoothing out the expenditures for the rest of the departments and minimizing the impact on tax revenues and other revenues of the city. So we're recommending we adopt a new resolution relating to the golf carts to go ahead and have the fleet fund purchase them and then lease them back to the golf course.
Mr. Mayor.
Council question. Mr. Ferguson.
I'm not too good with lease rates. I'm better with actual dollars out and dollars in. The question I have is on page 112 of the agenda. There's a net sales amount of $274,000, which represents a $91,000 credit. Is that the amount of money to be refunded upon return of them after 4 years?
That's correct.
So we write a check for $274,000?
No, we write the check today for the full amount.
You're saying it's 303?
303.
And we'll get 91 back later?
There's a $91,000 commitment to buy them back at the end of the four-year term from Club Car. Of course, they have to, be in usable condition if, they've been driven.
Which would be the same if we lease them, though, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Would be the same if we lease them.
So without getting into the lease rate, it looks good for the golf course financial statement, but also the fleet, you have the money, and we have the money in the fleet fund, so that makes sense to use it. However, we're giving up 1% of the money because we've transferred it to Club Car, the $300,000, right? You're not able to make it 1.13% on that.
You're making 2 instead.
Right, we're charging 2% to the golf course on the money that we're giving up to buy in other words, the money we're using to buy the golf carts, we're going to recoup 2% return on that from the golf course.
So the net amount of money out is less than 274.
If you take into account the interest, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So that's the confusing part to me is we're putting out 303 point something, or 761. We're going to get 90,000 back 4 years from now. So that's 220 or something. Is that right? Net?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So the internal things are looking good for the golf course and looking good for the fleet fund.
Yes.
Both of them.
So I'm confused by the 274 net amount here. I don't quite get this page, but we can talk about that
I would have to take a look at that again. That might be some kind of carryover from the previous lease, but we'll take a look at it. But we do have a commitment letter from Club Car to buy the carts back at the end of the 4 years for just over $90,000, as if we were using a different leasing company instead of using our own leasing company.
Okay, so
I think the net is the 97 minus the 303.
Right. Right.
Your Honor, Chris, since we would now be the lessor instead of the lessee, will we also take depreciation on this equipment?
We would.
So that's an additional write-off that we can put against this that we haven't really.
Right, yeah, there would be depreciation in the fleet fund because it is treated like a business entity, very similar to the utility capital asset.
Thank you.
The 48 months, just as an aside, the reason why 48 months is the magic number is because that's the term of the warranty on these, and of course with the electric carts, the battery packs become very expensive and they're covered completely during that 48-month time frame.
Other council questions? Open the meeting to the public. And from the public wish to be heard on this agenda item.
Jack Cowell, Palm Coast. Do we have 70 people playing golf every day? You know, if we got that kind of money, you know, if we got that kind of people playing golf, then we should be running a profit. You know, 70 people a day, that's an awful lot of, I drive by the golf course on Pine Lakes, and I'm lucky if I see 2 people in a month. So you're telling me that you're getting 70 people
That's not us.
playing golf on one day, that you need 70 carts?
We'll get an answer to your question. Next speaker.
George Spear, resident of Palm Coast. Smart idea, first off, to buy the carts. That's what I said the last month. But on the other side of the coin, if the golf course, let's just arbitrarily say we're charging them 2% interest on the money they're borrowing from the purchase fund. If they're losing $1,000 a month now, and you're charging them 2% of that, so we're now losing, arbitrary number, $1,200 a month. I guess the major question is, when do we envision, A, cutting our losses at the golf course, or making them do, I mean, it's got to break even for the taxpayers in this town. At some point in time, between the golf course and the tennis court, somebody's got to do something, because it's not a smart move. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. Next speaker. Seeing no one approach the podium, we'll close the public portion of the meeting. Chris, are we penalizing the golf course with this 2%?
In fact, it's not. If you could, on this slide, the lease payment will be just over $4,600. The proposed lease payment was almost $5,400. It's about a $9,000 a year savings to the golf course to help offset those deficiencies that they've had in the past couple of years.
And then the actual fleet fund, which is supported by a combination of revenue, including tax dollars, is making 1% more on in other words, getting a better return on the investment for the dollars. So the fund supported by taxpayers is making more money off the golf course, and the golf course is seeing a reduction in their cost.
Right.
Both of them are winning. It's these kind of reductions in expenses at the golf course that will help it break even also, and that's one of our goals.
Right, right.
And I think the slide that's up there now is the ultimate answer for why this is the right thing to do. We cannot waive our sovereign immunity as a local government.
Right.
We cannot. We must not.
The other question, Mayor, I've done a little math here real quick.
Sure.
Question is 70 golf carts. We have 70 players out there. You know, we're close to 40,000 rounds a year at Palm Harbor. So pretty easy math. If it was 36,500, it would be 100 players or rounds a day on average. So it's probably on average we're out there 100, 110. Now that includes rain days where you have 0. So obviously there are many days you have more than 110.
Well, it also includes tournaments where you have a shotgun start.
Yeah,
too.
yeah, and then, but the real critical of this is a shotgun start. And the industry, because we looked at it again because of questions, is 4 carts per hole to make sure you have plenty for the tournaments, and that would be 72. So, and this is only 70. So we're within that industry average, and the tournaments are critical for the golf course to make money, and you don't want to turn away a big revenue generator because, oh, we don't have enough golf carts. Not a good business decision.
And for the day-to-day activity, it's always nice to have 1 or 2 in reserve just in case.
Absolutely, but it's a.
Can I say one thing?
Sure, we'll give you another shot at the apple, another bite at the apple.
That's one thing. Mr. Landon brought up the tournaments. Occasionally I watch them on television, and I remember back a few years ago where this one guy was crippled. He couldn't walk, and they disqualified him because he couldn't walk the course. Now, every tournament that I watch, they never use a cart on a tournament. It's always a walking tournament. So, I mean, unless we do something differently. But every time I watch television, it's always a walking with a caddy.
Those are the rules, Jackie. The pros have to walk.
Well, so we're.
Well, the tournament, you're a pro.
Mr. De Lorenzo.
We're also talking about a different kind of tournament. That's a professional tournament or a tournament for score or awards or
Money.
Money.
Lots of money.
Yeah. These are charitable tournaments where you have a large group of people come out and they go play and they have fun and then they, have dinner.
Half of them aren't golfers.
Recreational golf tournaments.
Yeah. Can I also comment that we should give Mr. Spear some credit because he did mention that at our last meeting when we had, or at this lease meeting, that we should consider purchasing. So, thank you, Mr. Spear.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry if I can just say one more item in relation to response about the golf course and the tennis center. We do talk a lot about trying to get the fees cover the costs on those recreational facilities. One of the things I did want to point out is that the city has many recreational facilities where we get zero for the use of those recreation facilities from fees. So things like our trails, many of our parks, all over the city, those things are not supported by fees. I just want to point that out because we do talk a lot about the golf course and tennis center, but we sometimes lose sight of all the other recreational amenities that we don't charge anything for.
Certainly true, but nonetheless, it is still our goal to break even at least.
Yes.
Other council questions, comments, or is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries without objection. This brings us to the consent agenda, but before I ask council if they wish to remove anything from the consent agenda, would anybody in the audience like to speak on any consent agenda item? Seeing none, consent agenda items 7 through 12. Any council member wish to remove any item from the agenda?
I don't want to remove one, but I have a question, Your Honor, and it's just a procedural thing. If we've already approved a budget purchasing heavy equipment, why do we need a resolution?
Because the actual purchase authority is only $30,000 of the city manager, so items over $30,000 require city council approval.
Okay.
Purchasing policy.
Nobody wish to do anything? Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries without objection. Public participation. This is the opportunity for the public to speak on any item not on today's agenda. It could be items relating to anything, including the topics of the last workshop.
Jack Carroll, Palm Coast. You go into all these different cities and they have signs that you could read. Now, when you go up to our city hall, you got a sign about this big that says Sheriff's Office. And you got another sign about that big that says City Hall. You got to slow down and you got to stop to read the sign. So, isn't it, I mean, shouldn't we have bigger signs? Now, I brought this up with the County Commission also. Because when you go to Prince's Place, you can't read that sign doing 40 miles an hour, because that's almost an impossibility, unless you know it's there. So if somebody's coming into the city, they're coming here, we should have something to direct them. Something that says, you know, go here or go there. You know, and show them. The sign is big. It's, you know, the guy got to put his glasses on, he's going to pass it right by.
Thank you. Next speaker. Next speaker. So you don't approach the podium, we close public portion meeting. Mr. Adams. I don't know, but I suspect that sign size on a public thoroughfare, on a public street, is in some extent regulated either by city code, DOT, or something like that. Do you have any insights? Or is that something we can ask our traffic engineer to look at?
I bet if you put one that said garage sale out there, everybody would be.
Yes, of course, there's all kinds of standards regulated by our land development code, and then there's street signs that are regulated by the uniform traffic code. So,
Mr. Langdon, I'd like to ask our traffic engineer to just take a look at that issue. Are the signs limited, and how big can you make them? Well, the problem is when you have approaching the city offices, you've got a curb, you've got a median, you've got a sidewalk. If you make the sign too much bigger, you're going to occlude the sidewalks.
I'd be happy to ask him, but I drive by it all the time, and it's a standard street sign. But
doesn't hurt to ask.
Yep.
Doesn't hurt to ask. Discussion by city council matters not on the agenda. Mr. Vice Mayor.
Nothing to offer, Your Honor.
Mr. Lewis. Mr. DiLorenzo.
In addition to hearing great speakers at the BAC Expo, I had the pleasure of meeting a new business in Palm Coast that does closed captioning. And she informed me, and I'm here to ask, that all government meetings that are televised are required to be closed captioned. I didn't know if that was true or not, and I would ask that we could look into that.
You are the second one that she's obviously approached that has brought that up. And
it better not be the mayor, because he told me it was my homework.
Okay. I will never say who, but yes, we've already on task to take a look at that. Okay. And if it is required by law, we'll obviously figure out how to do it. And if we ever got a request for it, then that would be a valid reason to do it also. But I've never heard of a request. But we will definitely look at that and make sure that we're within the law.
Okay, thank you.
Isn't Tom looking into that?
Probably.
Yeah, it's under our communications division.
Mr. Ferguson.
Nothing to offer, Your Honor.
Discussion by city attorney of matters not on the agenda.
Nothing this evening, Mr. Mayor.
Discussion by city manager of matters not on the agenda.
Couple of things. One of them, I want to recognize the fact that we got another certification this time. It's like an award in finance. In this case, it was from the Association of Public Treasurers of the U.S. Didn't know they existed, but it was for our investment policy that City Council adopted a few months ago, and it's an investment policy certificate of excellence award. So they like that policy and acknowledge that. So I thought that was very positive. It's one of those that Chris has brought to us and the policy and made sure it fit the guidelines that gets national recognition. So I thought that was extremely positive and just another indication of the high standards in our finance department that City Council has obviously insisted on. Also, BAC, the Business Assistance Center Expo, wanted to acknowledge what a great event that is. and that everybody involved in that, I think, deserves a congratulations on being able to make it bigger and better every year. It's very positive. We also had our seafood festival. For those of you that know that I'm in charge of weather, I was on vacation Saturday. I just wanted to go on record as saying that Saturday was a tough day, but Sunday was a beautiful day. And if you haven't seen the pictures of the chalk work, it is phenomenal. We will bring those to the workshop so you can see those, but they're on our Facebook page. It truly looks like they're coming right out of the sidewalk, or concrete. Very impressive. This weekend we have more activity. Boy, it's a busy time of year with lacrosse tournament, big lacrosse tournament for Veterans Day. And then Monday is a holiday for the city. And we have our Veterans Day ceremony at Heroes Park. Help me out. 8:30. 8:30. So hopefully we see you all out there Monday, and then back to work with workshop on Tuesday. Thank you, Mayor.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
Move to adjourn.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
As long as we continue down the path that we're doing, I think we're making progress.